in Los Angeles, like I remember I said this like in a joke. I was like, it costs like the average price of therapy in Los Angeles is $200 an hour. And I was like, you would have to grow a dick, for me to suck. And then I am still going to try to bargain you down to 150.
Yeah, I that is definitely an image that you created with that.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
And welcome back. Alyssa, when I saw this article, I immediately knew that we had to talk about exactly this phenomenon. And that is, well, I'll let the article speak for itself. This is an article by Rebecca Fishbein published by Bustle. And this is the opening couple paragraphs. Everybody who is listening should read it. It's like very good. Last summer, Anna, 24, was dumped by a longtime friend over text. While making plans to meet up, the friend pivoted and told Anna she wanted to end their 5-year friendship. When Anna asked if it was something she did, her friend told her she wasn't comfortable answering and that there was no more room for discussion. I'm in a place where I'm trying to honor my needs and act in alignment with what feels right within the scope of my life, and I'm afraid our friendship doesn't seem to fit in that framework. The friend wrote, I can no longer hold the emotional space you've wanted me to, and think the support you need is beyond the scope of what I can offer.
I would normally call something like that like goop talk, but that's even crazier than goop talk.
That sounds like you're firing someone.
Yes, it totally does. Actually, we've got a sound
with no severance. With no severance.
We have a TikTok that went viral last summer that also has some sound in it that kind of fits the phenomenon that we're talking about.
I've noticed being withdrawn and haven't wanted to hang out with you. What's going on? I've treasured our season of friendship, but we're moving in different directions in life. I don't have the capacity to invest in our friendship any longer. Is it something I did? This feels really sudden. I get that it might be hard to understand, but I've been reevaluating many areas of my life recently, including my ability to be a good friend to you. I just want to be honest and upfront so I don't disappoint your expectations. I'm sorry if this feels painful and confusing. I wish you all love and success.
Oh my God. Okay.
Absolute batshit.
Absolutely bonkers bananas. I'm so excited to talk about the therapizing of everyday speech and the turning of interpersonal relationships into, like one of our guests pointed out, like essentially HR interactions. Bizarre. So our first panelist is the founder of the nonprofit Rise, a 2019 Nobel Peace Prize nominee and a 2022 Time Woman of the Year, Amanda Nguyen. Welcome to Hysteria.
Thanks.
How did those passages and that soundbite make you feel?
Honestly, I was taking notes, right? Because I have some friends to break up with. And I hope that they will respect my boundaries in this confusing time. Do you remember that movie where somebody hired, I think, George Clooney to fire other people? Like, that's what I'm thinking of. It's really awkward and disorienting. But honestly, I can understand the appeal of it. Have I had one of these talks? No. But am I still taking notes? Yes.
Okay, our next panelist is a comedian with some tour dates coming up this summer. She'll be at Zanies in Chicago in July on my birthday, July 26th and 27th.
Oh, wow. Happy birthday.
Yeah,
happy birthday.
Thank you. I wish I was in Chicago on my birthday. Summer in Chicago is great. Kiran will also be at the DC Comedy Loft July 28th to the 30th. Kiran Deol, welcome to Hysteria.
Hi, my dear. And Detroit in May. But I thought a more humane thing to say when I watched that video was just the woman, if she had just looked herself or her friend in the face and just been like, I don't like you anymore. You a terrible person. This is over. Just, you know what I mean? Like, be clear.
Yeah.
Have humanity. It sounded like it was written by an AI. I was like, eventually I hope to be able to outsource the breakups of my friendships to AI. And that woman, she really emulated that, like, I know that this must be painful and hard for you. That.
Yeah. It's funny when I remember, I just watched the video, and when I think about the video, I remember her doing robot hands while she's doing the thing. Even though she's not, I feel like the robot hands were implied. Alyssa, how do you feel when you hear like the excerpt I read from Fishbein's article and the sound bite that we played?
When I first read that article and watched the TikTok for the first time, I got so stressed because I just imagined someone doing that to me. I would lose my mind if someone didn't explain to me why they suddenly hated me, or like just do it in a nicer way. Be like, Alyssa, I love you, but like I'm so slammed right now. I'll pick up with you on the other side, and then never pick up with me on the other side. We both be fine. It's totally easy to do. You know what? Why'd you fucking make plans with her in the first place, ya asshole? You don't like her? You've been thinking about breaking up with her? Were you going to break up with her at dinner and you just decided to do it a little bit earlier? I mean, doing it over text is so shitty. But the whole, like, I have to save, she made it sound like she had been assaulted by this poor woman. Like, I have to save space for myself and I have to do this. Fuck off. Like, you're fine. You're fine. Stop acting like you're not fine. You're fine.
That's like language that you use when you're confronting an abusive parent. Like, or
Yes.
way more
Or having an
complicated-
intervention.
Yeah, exactly. Or like therapy speak. I think we've all seen it proliferated in recent years, especially with like TikTok and social media, like amateur psych tips and stuff. So like some examples: gaslight, trauma, boundary setting, coping mechanisms, codependence, toxicity, projection, triggers, love bombing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Amanda, have you noticed, does this bother you at all? Like, is there any one of these? Yeah. Is there anything that you find like particularly irksome about it?
Yeah, I literally actually had to set a time limit on my TikTok because I couldn't take this anymore. I kept getting these, and I know the algorithm feeds you what you want, so maybe to a certain point I had liked it, but I really believe that if one is not a therapist, they shouldn't be saying these things and trying to teach other people without having a license to. I think there's a proliferation of people who are self-diagnosing themselves incorrectly. And that can have really profound implications on how you interact with people like this, Actually, I want to ask, is that clip you showed us, was that like an actress being satirical, or was that for real?
That was for real. That was a real, yeah.
No.
And that
wasn't. I thought it was
yeah.
funny. I was like, oh, she's a comedian.
But that was a
Like,
therapist.
this was actually.
She's
Yeah,
a therapist,
that was
though,
a
right?
Wow.
That woman is a therapist, which, to be clear, is why her acting was so bad.
Okay. Well,
I mean,
maybe not all licensed therapists should also be on teaching people.
TikTok. Maybe they shouldn't be on TikTok.
I think TikTok is
Yeah.
maybe not the greatest place for a therapist. Kiran, have you noticed a particular word or therapy buzzword that you've seen around a lot and you're like, no, this shouldn't be used like this?
Erin, that question is really triggering for me right now. Please return back to me at a different time, okay? There is an Instagram page that my friend sent me called Healing from Healing. I don't know if you're aware of it, but it's very funny. And it's kind of about the proliferation of listen, on the one hand, I am as guilty of this as anybody. It's I appreciate the idea of having self-knowledge or getting to learn who you are so that you can hopefully be a better person, or have empathy towards other people. On the other hand, you probably don't know shit, bitch. Do you know what I mean? It's just the internet and you're Googling. Most therapists also probably shouldn't be talking about it because about half of them are shitty at their jobs. It's one of my friends said this once. He goes, I was talking about I was I don't understand why I'm having so many problems, whatever. And he goes, you need to remember, Kiran, that most people are bad at what they do. And I thought, this is a very helpful note. I think that's actually helpful to remember even with mental health professionals or anything you're looking at on the internet, right? It's maybe at least half of those people are full of shit.
Mm-hmm. Alyssa, what do you make of the therapy speak in real life? And do you agree that many people who are working in the mental health space are indeed full of shit?
Full of shit.
I'm not gonna double down on the mental health space because I'm not a comedian, and so I can't stand behind that. I'm just gonna say I think that taking any real advice to TikTok is probably more problematic than helpful when it relates to people's mental health, unless you're giving them resources to actually seek help, and not telling them to just abuse the word triggering and toxic. I mean, that's the thing, is like all these words have lost all of their meaning. Like the way that people use the word toxic now, I had a friend sort of a friend, use the word toxic in such a wrong. She's like, you know what? And she's so toxic, like she's always late. And I'm like, that's not really a toxic trait. That's an annoying trait.
I mean, is she a surgeon who's late to surgery? Because that's toxic.
It's like, no, it's not
she's
that.
just a regular person being late.
But
like a regular
she
person.
went to therapy one time, and she uses all these words. And I'll say, you know, if you go back in time. I remember, and I don't recall how I learned or why I learned, but the difference between, actually, it might have been in nursery school, like making an I statement, being like, this is how I feel, like not projecting feelings onto other people. I thought that was like a helpful thing. You know, now I always try to just say, this is how I feel, and I make an I statement. But other than that, I think like all this stuff is really, it's not very helpful, and it's mostly annoying. It's I mean, the triggering, the toxic, my boundaries, it really feels like an excuse for people who are actually being lazy. Like they come off and they're just like, I am so like in tune with myself, and I meditated, and then I decided to tell you that you're invading my boundaries. And it's like, no, you actually don't want to have a real conversation. And so you're going to torture this poor other person and be like, you know what? I don't have space for you anymore. And then they're going to have to wonder. I don't know. It all is very upsetting. It's very upsetting to me.
It can be used as virtue signaling language is basically what you're saying. It's like using your virtue signaling through the language, which I think is what I meant when I said, I think people are full of shit.
I think it's also like kind of class signaling, because where I grew up, it wasn't like, it's not really accessible to go to therapy. Therapy isn't covered by most insurance, like in network. Even really good insurance is not covered. They don't cover therapy in network. So if you can afford to go to therapy and you can afford to learn these words, it's a way to kind of signal that you can afford to go to therapy. And I think that that's something that maybe gets lost a little bit in the mental health, in the way that we talk about mental health. And I think that it also makes it really appealing on social media like TikTok, because then this class signifier is available to people who maybe can't afford to go to therapy on a one-on-one basis. And I mean, I didn't mean to throw a wrench in the gears, but it just feels a little bit like I'm upper middle class, I'm wealthy, I can afford to do this. I'm wealthy enough in time that I can take the immense amount of time it takes to actually work on myself, and then kind of weaponizes that to justify kind of all manner of what my therapist would call maladaptive behaviors. I want to talk about the phrase boundary setting, because that seems to be kind of a bugaboo for a lot of people here. Amanda, have you ever had somebody tell you they were setting a boundary and really they were just kind of being a dick and wanting to escape any sort of response?
Yeah, politicians all the time when I try to get them to do anything. I think boundaries are important, of course. And as an activist, it's my job to push those boundaries, especially when it's public servants who are supposed to be listening to our voices, and especially at the UN, they'll tell you like that's not your place, and actually I think it is my place to speak about these things. They're like, you must have boundaries. But the thing is that in at least my international work, the definition of boundaries really has different cultural implications. Like it's really different from country to country. And so I'm talking on like a democracy level of what is expected out of civil society, but of course that translates even to therapy, right? Like there are plenty of people who give these advices on therapy, and it's just generalized, but it's really different culture to culture.
Mm-hmm. Can you expand a little on that? Like, what is it? What is a place that you have worked where the concept of a boundary is radically different than the U.S. in a noteworthy way?
Oh, totally. And so, I was trying to get this resolution passed at the United Nations General Assembly, and every country, no matter how big or small you are, everyone gets one vote. And so we had to work with, all of them. And there are certain countries that believe activists should not be engaged within any sort of legislative work. So if we go and we say, I want to tell my story and I'm fighting for this specific piece of legislation, they'll straight up tell us that is not what you can do at the United Nations. You are supposed to be selected, handpicked by the authorities that be. You speak when we tell you to speak. You will vet all of your remarks. So freedom of speech is just a wildly different concept. And so when we're pushing on these boundaries, I'm telling them, no, I think you're wrong. And it's really different sets of values.
Mm-hmm. I think that's interesting because it sounds like that concept of boundary comes from like an old-fashioned approach to, like a legacy approach. But this kind of therapy speak proliferation at its worst, I'm seeing it sort of become a new way that young people try to enforce like a status quo. Kiran, have you ever been told that somebody is setting a boundary or like use the word boundary in a way that you were like, what?
A friend of mine was reading a book on boundaries and trying to get better at her own boundaries. And then she had a conversation with, I actually think she did a pretty good job though. She's pretty nice. She's a pretty nice person. She was talking about her boundaries and she was like, I'm so bad at this. Blah! Like, and at least she was like human about the way that she did it, which I thought was good. The other thing that makes me think of, like, Amanda, when you're talking about how different cultures handle things differently and accessibility, is I think about like the NHS, like in Britain, you can get on a wait list and you can get therapy and it is free, right? Because it's a national healthcare service. So they have like worksheets that are like literally explaining 20 to 30 pages that you can download on the internet about cognitive behavioral therapy and like what you can do while you're on this wait list, which I think is hilarious.
What does it say?
It basically breaks down. I mean, I'll send it to you. It breaks down like how to catch your thoughts, when to catch them, like what this whole thing is and like whatever the fuck the thing is. But it's very funny to me that they're like, because this is free and we don't have time to take care of all of you here, help yourself in the meantime so you don't die. And I think that's there's something about that in terms of class that's at least given by the government, as opposed to like, I was saying in Los Angeles, like I remember I said this like in a joke. I was like, it costs like the average price of therapy in Los Angeles is $200 an hour. And I was like, you would have to grow a dick, for me to suck, and then I am still going to try to bargain you down to 150.
Yeah, I that is definitely an image that you created with that.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Alyssa, like, do you find yourself using therapy buzzwords ever? I mean, they're so like in the zeitgeist right now.
Not really. No, I mean, it's just not. I would never look if anyone was in my space, and I have had people, because I welcome too much in. I am the chaos agent in many cases. I'm like, let me help you. I'll help you. And then I end up with people who don't go away. And I was like, oh, I was just going to help you for that one time. I didn't mean for you to keep doing this. But some people, I just slow down the connect. Like, it's like, no, I don't text them. If they text me, I wait a while, I write back. Like, but I don't say, you know what? I don't say to someone who I think needs help, maybe, that I'm going to set boundaries on them. I don't feel like that's helpful, or that it's not going to just boomerang back and become something worse than it was. So I don't use I just use my own words, my own words are okay.
Yeah. I think a place that this gets used a lot, therapy speak, is now in like breakups. Like, I have a friend who's like telling me he's single, and he was like telling me about this like really weird breakup he had where she was like, she dropped all of these like it was like she went from being a person to being like this complete like robotic, like, well, I enjoyed our time together. We should not continue. I do not see a way forward for this connection. This will be the last that we communicate, and I wish you well. And it was like, what? Like, it seems very like almost meaner than just being like, look, I'm not feeling it. Yeah, it's not working for me. I'm not feeling it. Sorry. Like it almost feels like insulting that a person sat down and like, can't, like, they must have rehearsed this because this isn't how normal people talk, like they must have like looked in a mirror and said like, I can no longer hold space for our friendship as I realign my priorities. Like, what the fuck? It's like so insulting to be on the receiving end of something like that.
You just want to, it's like you want everyone to know that if they ever end up in a conversation like that, they just need to be like, cool, that's it, no other words. Boundary, cool, I'm good, bye.
Cool.
It's such a condescending way to communicate, I think. It's this trying to make yourself so superior to this other person, and it's like.
And on the flip side, I think the intention is that people are trying to have a language around not avoiding things, right? So like I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday who was saying, oh my God, like I get so overwhelmed when I'm rejecting somebody. It stresses me out so much. I get like hives, And so she was like, so I would just, if it's my job to reject someone, I'll just like ghost. I'll just like never talk to them again, which is also can be mean. Cause like what you said, Erin, was like, hey, I'm not feeling it. Wishing you the best. Sorry. Sounds good. But like if you hella nervous or you're a person who then like can't reject someone well, or the stakes are high, right? I think sometimes those words don't come out as eloquently and as simply as that. And people are looking for some guidance the same way they would be looking at an intervention. I mean, like I thought it was funny that you guys mentioned the intervention at the top because you're like, oh, you wouldn't talk to humans this way, but let's talk to someone who's in an extremely low place in their life this way. That should work well.
Yeah. I think there's a part of me that sees like, of course, like advocating for yourself, setting boundaries for yourself is really important. And I think that as women, we're socialized to kind of have really amenable boundaries. Like, our boundaries aren't really boundaries. They're like the starting point to negotiations. And that happens when it comes to like, our viewpoints, our hobbies. In a lot of hetero relationships, like kind of we're expected to take on the guy's hobbies and he doesn't really reciprocally show interest in our own. Like we're supposed to, just kind of like be completely giving with our time. We're supposed to be totally like selfless. Like if you don't have boundaries, you stop existing like as a human being.
And here's the one thing, Erin, this is because this has got to a point I was trying to make in my head and it got lost before, is that the problem with the therapy speak that you see all over TikTok and on social media, not perhaps what really happens in real life, but what is being popularized on social media right now, is finite. It is not, you know what? Erin, you text me too much. And I love you, girl.
I do text you too much.
No, fuck off. But it's not actually what the thing is that when they're all talking about setting boundaries, they're not setting boundaries. They're excommunicating people. It's the wrong word, I feel like, for what they're actually doing. Because if you wanted to set a boundary with someone, you'd be like, you know what? Here's how I feel about you. It's like, I'm not a texter like you. I don't keep up. I don't do 100 times a day. So like, let's be in touch once or twice a week. That's setting a boundary. Saying I am setting a boundary and therefore will never speak to you again is not actually a boundary. Mm-hmm. Like, that's just how I feel. It's like a word for something that you're not really doing.
Mm-hmm. Amanda, you're kind of nodding. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I read somewhere that if somebody is setting a boundary with you in the way that Alyssa just said, they're actually trying to invest and prolong the relationship, right? It's not cutting somebody out. It's saying, hey, here's what I need in order to still continue a relationship with you because I actually do want to continue a relationship with you. Yeah, so those are two different concepts. And I think also, as an activist, boundaries in general are really, really important in order to continue doing really hard work. Again, in that way that Alyssa described, it's not cutting things out completely, but finding a medium ground that honors your own mental health while also, still doing really, really hard things. Because activism fatigue is a really real thing. People burn out and then they leave causes forever because they don't feel like they could make a difference. So yeah, boundaries, I think, are actually a means to continue whatever it is that you're doing.
And Amanda, to your point, I was just super quick, but like, I feel like I have learned things from people talking about this, right? Like, you guys know how I feel about my pets, and I have a vet who comes to the house. And when something happened to Winky, I texted her on Monday and I said, oh, here's what happened. She's like, why didn't you text me over the weekend? I was like, girl, boundaries. I don't want you to ever break up with me. And so I didn't bother you on the weekend because I wanted to, it wasn't an emergency and blah, blah, blah. And I feel like that's, again, it's like where all of the misnomer of a boundary is actually being abused.
And then there's also like the workplace stuff where you're like in France, they have that thing where you're not allowed to, like, now you're available all the time, right? Like like we all have cell phones all the time. That the fact that you could text your vet over the weekend, to text her and have her be available. The idea that everyone is always supposed to be available for anything, and especially the boundarylessness in a competitive industry, and like what the expectations are in that landscape can be really, like, it does feel like in a corporate context, in a corporate setting, the notion of boundaries and being a little bit more strict like that in terms of the UN, in terms of activism, those places feel like a little bit more, it feels a little bit more appropriate to have harder lines than maybe, let's say, the bitch you go brunch with on Sunday.
Yeah.
Or like Josh at skee ball, Erin, like.
I didn't know he played skee ball. I think, like, Amanda, you mentioned like the need for activists to set boundaries. Let's wrap this conversation up with, like, what's an example of a boundary that you've successfully set for yourself around your work?
Yeah, a lot of people, I work in sexual violence space, so a lot of people write to me during their moments of trauma, right after a rape. They'll say, get me a lawyer, or like, how can, you connect me to the right hospital? What do I do? And so I won't respond, actually, because I literally get thousands of these messages. And, we have an automatic response that's like, if you need direct help, here are the places that are actually meant for that. And that is, and actually the other boundary is that I don't read comments, especially when I'm talking about my own trauma, for my own mental health. And that has been very, very helpful in both of these cases. If people come up to me in person and they share with me their trauma, I'll thank them. And then if they ask for that help, I'll be like, I'm so sorry. That's something that other people can do really well. Here's that resource. I can do it. I'm passing it on to people who can. And that for me has really, really helped. In the beginning, I try to help, right? Because there are people who wrote in with these like terrible stories. I'm human, like I want to help. But thousands of them every single week, you can't do that. Some people don't understand. But I don't fault them because they're in their moment of trauma.
Yeah, I think professional boundaries are super important, especially if you're working in a space that has so much heaviness and weight.
Yeah.
And like Kiran, like you mentioned, like working in a competitive space, like in entertainment and comedy, if there are people who are willing to like work 24/7, it's hard to be like, I'm not doing that, because you feel like they're going to pass you by, or that's the normal thing.
We don't have external rules. Now, to be clear, I don't think comedy is exactly dealing with rape and sexual violence on a regular basis. It's like when you're like thousands of text messages about people getting raped, I'm like, there's just a lot of guys in my DMs who are like, marry me, so it's like kind of a different vibe. But yeah, I'd be interested to see how we culturally could shift. I mean, America's always been that way in terms of work, right? Like there's like this very like, it's the Puritan thing. It's like, it's the bootstrap shit, that's who we are. And it's triggering because I'm lazy. Thank you. Thank you.